Hulk Hogan in the 80s was more recognizable than the president and more influential than politicians. From body slamming Andre the Giant to starring in Hollywood blockbusters, he didn't just wrestle, he conquered American culture itself. However, fame came with consequences that would later threaten everything he represented. But whether you loved him or hated him, this man changed wrestling forever. From a bass player in Tampa to wrestling's biggest star, to a legend whose complex legacy will be debated long after his passing, this is the untold story of Hulk Hogan. Terry Bollea was born in Augusta, Georgia in 1953, but his family moved to Tampa, Florida when he was just 1 year old. Growing up in Tampa, Terry developed two passions that would shape his early adult life. He loved professional wrestling and spent countless hours watching matches at the Tampa Sportatorium. He cheered for Dusty Rhodes and dreamed about what it would be like to perform in front of crowds. But his more immediate passion was music, specifically the bass guitar. Terry spent hours every day practicing his bass guitar skills in his bedroom. He wasn't just fooling around with the instrument. He was serious about becoming a professional musician and making it big in the music industry. The bass guitar became his obsession during his teenage years. He learned every song he could get his hands on and studied the techniques of famous bass players. His dedication to music was so intense that he decided to drop out of the University of South Florida in 1976 to pursue his musical dreams full-time. He joined several local bands in the Tampa Bay area, including one called Ruckus, that gained real popularity on the local scene. The band played at venues throughout Florida and built a following that made Terry believe music could be his future. Terry stood out in every band he joined, but not always for the right reasons. At 6 feet 7 inches tall, he towered over his bandmates and looked out of place on stage with most musical groups. His height made him an oddity in the Florida music scene where most bass players were average-sized. But the reality was that Terry's music career had hit a ceiling. Ruckus and his other bands played the same circuit without any real breakthrough to the next level. The money was inconsistent and the future looked uncertain. His massive frame seemed better suited for something else entirely. Everything changed during a routine workout at Hector's Gym in Tampa. Hector's Gym was a well-known training ground and social hub for professional wrestlers in the area. Terry went there to stay in shape and noticed professional wrestlers training in a section of the gym. He watched them practice their moves and was fascinated by their athleticism and showmanship. The wrestlers noticed Terry too. Jack and Jerry Briscoe were training at the gym that day, and they were impressed by Terry's imposing size and natural physical presence. The Briscoe brothers were respected figures in the wrestling world, and they had an eye for talent. They approached Terry and asked if he had ever considered professional wrestling as a career. Terry had been a wrestling fan since childhood, but he had never thought about it as a realistic career option for himself. The Briscoe brothers were convinced that Terry had the physical tools to succeed in wrestling. They connected him with Hiro Matsuda, a respected wrestling trainer who worked with Championship Wrestling from Florida. Matsuda agreed to train Terry, but he warned him that the wrestling business would break most men both physically and mentally. The training would be unlike anything Terry had experienced. Terry struggled through Matsuda's intense training regime, even working through a sprained ankle injury during his early sessions. The physical demands were overwhelming, and the mental pressure was constant. Matsuda pushed every trainee to their breaking point to see who had the heart to continue. For over a year, Terry endured the punishment and slowly learned the fundamentals of professional wrestling. When Terry finally committed fully to wrestling, he was abandoning a music career that had shown real promise for something completely unknown. This decision would eventually make him the most recognizable athlete in the world. But first, he had to prove himself in the ring and learn how to work a crowd. What nobody expected was how Terry Bollea would make his wrestling debut. Championship Wrestling from Florida introduced Terry Bollea as a villain with bleached blonde hair and an attitude that made fans want to see him get beaten up. This early heel character was the complete opposite of everything the Hulk Hogan persona would represent. He wasn't preaching about training, prayers, and vitamins. Instead, he was arrogant, destructive, and everything wrestling fans love to hate. The Florida territory needed a monster heel who could use his size to intimidate smaller wrestlers. Terry fit that role perfectly with his 6 feet 7 inches frame and natural physical presence. He played the cocky bad guy who thought he was better than everyone else in the locker room. His job was to make the crowd angry, and he was good at it from the very beginning. Fans genuinely despised this character because he represented everything they didn't like about bullies and show-offs. Wrestling promoters were thrilled with the reaction Terry generated as a heel. Crowds would boo him loudly whenever he appeared, which was exactly what they wanted from their new villain. The louder the boos, the more successful he was at his job. He learned how to work the crowd's emotions and make them invested in seeing him lose. This skill would become crucial to his later success as a fan favorite, but at the time, he was focused on being the best bad guy possible. His natural charisma was obvious even when he was playing a character that fans hated. Wrestling veterans backstage noticed something special about his presence in the ring. He had an ability to command attention that couldn't be taught or faked. Even as a villain, he drew reactions that many wrestlers spent years trying to generate. The combination of his size, look, and personality made him stand out from other heels on the roster. Terry also wrestled under a mask as the Super Destroyer during his early Florida Territory days. Matsuda's mask gave him ring experience without revealing his identity, allowing him to develop his character work without fan recognition. This masked character wore black and red gear with a black lucha mask covered in stars. He could work on his in-ring skills and develop different personas without everyone knowing it was the same person. This experience as the Super Destroyer taught him how different characters could generate completely different crowd reactions. He learned how to use his size as a weapon against smaller opponents. His matches were built around the idea that he was too big and too strong for his opponents to handle. He would dominate them physically and then show off afterward, which made fans even angrier. This formula worked because it was simple and effective. Fans wanted to see the big bully get his comeuppance from a smaller, more heroic wrestler. One night at the Tampa Sportatorium, Terry was working a match against a popular local favorite when something clicked. As he tossed his opponent around the ring like a rag doll, the crowd's hatred reached a fever pitch. When he flexed his muscles and sneered at the audience after delivering a devastating leg drop, the entire building erupted in boos so loud they drowned out the ring announcer. In that moment, Terry realized he had complete control over 1,500 people's emotions. They were hanging on his every move, desperate to see him lose. Wrestling veterans noticed that Terry had something special that went beyond just his physical advantages. His timing was natural, and he understood how to pace a match to build crowd reactions. He knew when to be aggressive and when to slow things down. These instincts can't be taught, and many wrestlers never develop them even after years in the business. The experience of being hated first would ironically make him much better at being loved later in his career. Most wrestlers who start as fan favorites never learn how to manipulate crowd emotions the way heels do. Terry's heel foundation gave him tools that he would use throughout his entire career, even when he was playing the ultimate good guy. But his wrestling success in Florida was about to be overshadowed by an opportunity that would change everything about his career trajectory. Sylvester Stallone needed a massive wrestler for his upcoming movie, and Terry Bollea got the call that would change everything. The casting directors for Rocky III were looking for someone who could play Thunderlips, a professional wrestler who would face Rocky Balboa in an exhibition match. They needed someone with an imposing physical presence who could hold his own on screen with Stallone. Terry's 6 feet 7 inches frame and muscular build made him perfect for the role, even though he had zero acting experience. This was Terry's first real opportunity to break into mainstream entertainment. He was still working primarily in regional wrestling territories and wasn't well known outside of wrestling circles. Most movie audiences had never heard his name or seen him perform. The Rocky franchise was huge at the time, with Rocky and Rocky II being massive box office successes. Getting cast in Rocky III meant exposure to millions of people who would never watch a wrestling match. The Thunderlips character was perfect for Terry because it allowed him to be himself amplified. He played an over-the-top professional wrestler who was cocky and theatrical. The role required him to wrestle Rocky in front of a crowd, which was something he could do naturally. He brought the same charisma and larger-than-life personality that worked in wrestling rings to the movie set. The character was designed to be entertaining and memorable, which played to all of Terry's strengths. Stallone was impressed by Terry's natural presence and authenticity during filming. The movie star had worked with many actors and could recognize when someone had that special quality that translated well on screen. Terry wasn't trying to be an actor in the traditional sense. He was just being himself, but that genuineness came across powerfully on camera. His comfort level with performing and working crowds made him easy to direct and fun to work with. The wrestling sequence in Rocky III became one of the most memorable scenes in the movie. Terry's Thunderlips character was both threatening and entertaining, exactly what the scene needed. He made the exhibition match feel real while keeping it light enough to fit the movie's tone. The audience could see that this wasn't just some actor pretending to be a wrestler. This was a real wrestler who happened to be charismatic enough for movies. When Rocky III hit theaters in 1982, it became a massive success at the box office. Audiences loved the movie, and many of them specifically remembered the wrestler who had shared scenes with Rocky Balboa. Terry's screen time was limited, but he made a strong impression during his appearance. People who had never watched wrestling suddenly knew who Thunderlips was and remembered his personality and presence. Wrestling promoters across the country started paying attention to what had happened. They realized they had a performer who could appeal to mainstream audiences beyond traditional wrestling fans. The movie proved that Terry had crossover potential that most wrestlers lacked. He wasn't just big and athletic. He had the kind of charisma that worked on the biggest stages and could connect with different types of audiences. The mainstream credibility from Rocky III opened doors that had been closed to wrestlers before. Television producers and other entertainment industry people started seeing wrestlers as potential mainstream personalities, rather than just athletes who performed for niche audiences. Terry had proven that wrestlers could work in other forms of entertainment if they had the right combination of physical presence and personality. His appearance in Rocky III had given him something that money couldn't buy: credibility with general audiences who didn't follow wrestling. He was no longer just a regional wrestling attraction. He had become a nationally recognized personality with proven crossover appeal. Wrestling offers started coming in from bigger territories, including the AWA and New Japan Pro Wrestling. The movie role demonstrated that Terry had something special that transcended the wrestling business. His natural charisma and ability to connect with audiences worked just as well in Hollywood as it did in wrestling arenas. This mainstream success had caught the attention of wrestling promoters everywhere, but one promoter in particular was watching more carefully than the rest. Vince McMahon Jr. had inherited a successful regional wrestling promotion from his father, but he wanted something much bigger. The World Wrestling Federation was profitable in its northeastern territory, but McMahon Jr. saw an opportunity that no one else in the wrestling business was willing to pursue. He planned to take the WWF National and break the territorial system that had controlled professional wrestling for decades. This was a massive financial gamble that could destroy everything his family had built. The territorial system worked like an unwritten agreement between wrestling promoters across the country. Each promotion stayed in its own geographic area and didn't compete directly with other territories. Promoters would occasionally share talent or coordinate storylines, but they respected each other's boundaries. This system had worked for decades and kept the wrestling business stable. McMahon Jr. cut ties with the National Wrestling Alliance in 1983 and was about to tear the entire system apart. His expansion plan required enormous financial investment and carried huge risks. He needed to secure television deals across multiple markets, invest in higher production values, and acquire the best talent from competing territories. The WWF would have to run shows across the entire country and compete directly with established regional promotions. If the plan failed, McMahon could lose everything his family had spent decades building. The key to success was finding a performer who could appeal to television audiences across different regions and demographics. Most wrestlers were regional attractions who worked well in their home territories but didn't have national appeal. McMahon needed someone with crossover potential who could connect with audiences who had never watched wrestling before. Traditional wrestling fans weren't enough to support a national expansion. McMahon saw Terry Bollea's appearance in Rocky III and realized he had found his perfect centerpiece. The movie had exposed Terry to millions of mainstream viewers who remembered his charismatic performance as Thunderlips. He had proven he could work on the biggest stages and appeal to audiences beyond wrestling's core fan base. This mainstream credibility was exactly what McMahon needed for his national expansion plans. But Terry was still working as a heel character in other wrestling territories. His villainous persona wouldn't work for McMahon's vision of family-friendly entertainment that could be marketed to children and parents. The transformation from heel to face required completely rebuilding Terry's character from the ground up. McMahon had to create a new version of Terry Bollea that could become a national icon. McMahon developed the character around his 3 Demandments training, prayers, and vitamins. This persona was designed to make Terry into a role model for children who promoted clean living rather than the destructive behavior associated with typical wrestling heels. The new character would tell kids to eat their vegetables, say their prayers, and take their vitamins. This wholesome message was designed to reassure parents who were concerned about the influence of entertainment on their children. The real American hero character was perfectly timed for Ronald Reagan's presidency and the patriotic mood of early 1980s America. McMahon created a wrestler who represented traditional American values and patriotism. The character wore red, white, and blue colors and promoted the idea that hard work and clean living would help you achieve your dreams. This messaging resonated with audiences who wanted heroes they could believe in. McMahon invested heavily in production values to showcase his new star properly. The WWF upgraded their television production with better cameras, lighting, and sound equipment. They created elaborate entrance music and costumes that made their wrestlers look like major league entertainers rather than regional attractions. The increased production costs were necessary to compete with other forms of mainstream entertainment. Television deals were essential to reaching national audiences and generating the revenue needed for expansion. McMahon secured deals with major networks and cable channels to broadcast WWF programming across the country. These deals provided the platform needed to showcase Hulk Hogan to audiences in markets where the WWF had never operated before. The television exposure was the foundation of everything else McMahon wanted to accomplish. The gamble paid off spectacularly as Hogan became the face of wrestling's first successful national expansion. The foundation was set when WrestleMania I aired on March 31, 1985. Proving that wrestling could compete with any form of entertainment when presented properly. The territorial system collapsed as other promotions couldn't match the WWF's production values and national television exposure. McMahon had built the entire WWF empire around one man's charisma and mainstream appeal, transforming wrestling from a regional attraction into something that would soon merge with popular culture in ways nobody had imagined. The rock and wrestling connection changed everything about how America saw professional wrestling. This wasn't just wrestlers performing for their usual audiences anymore. The WWF merged pop culture with sports entertainment in ways that nobody had tried before. Celebrities started showing up at wrestling events. Musicians wrote entrance themes for wrestlers. Wrestling storylines appeared on entertainment television shows. The whole thing was a massive experiment that could have failed completely. Traditional wrestling fans were not happy about these changes. They worried that wrestling was losing its authenticity and becoming too focused on entertainment rather than athletic competition. Old-school wrestling promoters thought McMahon was destroying the sport by turning it into a variety show. They believed wrestling should be about tough guys fighting each other, not about celebrities and rock stars. Many wrestling purists stopped watching because they felt the product had become too silly and theatrical. But mainstream America embraced what McMahon was creating. Hulk Hogan's feuds with Andre the Giant and Macho Man Randy Savage became appointment television that drew millions of viewers who had never cared about wrestling before. The January 4, 1986 episode of Saturday Night's Main Event earned a staggering 10.4 rating, which was unheard of for wrestling programming. These weren't just wrestling matches anymore. They were soap opera storylines with larger-than-life characters that people genuinely cared about. Children across America started copying everything Hogan did. They repeated his "What you gonna do?" catchphrase at school and on playgrounds. Kids began following his advice to train hard, say their prayers, and take their vitamins. Parents were buying vitamins for their children because Hulk Hogan told them it was important. This was unprecedented influence for a professional wrestler. No wrestler had ever connected with children the way Hogan did during this period. The merchandising operation generated revenue that wrestling promotions had never seen before. Hulk Hogan t-shirts were selling nationwide, proving that wrestling had moved beyond being just a live entertainment attraction. It had become a brand that could sell products to mainstream consumers. Wrestling events were selling out arenas that had never hosted professional wrestling matches before. The WWF was filling basketball and hockey arenas in major cities across America. These venues had hosted concerts and major sporting events, but wrestling had never been considered big enough for these locations. Television ratings reached levels that regional wrestling promotions could never have imagined. The WWF's national television exposure was drawing audiences that were bigger than most primetime entertainment shows. Wrestling was competing directly with sitcoms and dramas for viewer attention. This success attracted major advertisers who had never been interested in wrestling before. Companies that sold products to families and children started buying commercial time during wrestling broadcasts. The WWF promoted their events as supercards and invited major celebrities like Muhammad Ali, Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper, and Liberace to participate, with WrestleMania premiering live on MTV to connect wrestling directly to the music television audience. These celebrity appearances brought wrestling to audiences who would never have watched otherwise. Entertainment reporters started covering wrestling events because they featured recognizable celebrities. This media coverage expanded wrestling's reach even further into mainstream culture. Hogan's success demonstrated that wrestling could compete with any form of entertainment when presented properly. The production values matched what audiences expected from major television shows. The storylines were as compelling as soap operas. The characters were as memorable as movie stars. Wrestling had transformed from a niche attraction that appealed to specific demographics into legitimate mainstream entertainment. Everything the WWF had built during the rock and wrestling connection was leading towards something bigger. The foundation was set for wrestling to prove it could create spectacles that matched any major sporting event. Everyone in the wrestling business knew that whatever came next would center around Hulk Hogan, because he had become the face of wrestling's mainstream success. The Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan hosted 93,173 people on March 29, 1987, creating the largest wrestling audience in history. WrestleMania III changed professional wrestling forever, through months of careful storytelling that the WWF had never attempted before. Previous wrestling events focused on individual matches without much connection between them. This time was different. The WWF created a narrative that stretched across multiple television shows and months of programming. They turned Andre the Giant from Hogan's friend into his greatest enemy through careful storytelling and dramatic reveals. Andre had been billed as unbeaten for 15 years, and wrestling fans genuinely believed this giant had never lost a match in his entire career. The WWF promoted Andre as an unstoppable force who had never been slammed by any wrestler. His alliance with manager Bobby Heenan shocked fans who remembered Andre as a beloved hero. The heel turn felt like a betrayal because Andre had been wrestling's gentle giant for so many years. Fans couldn't believe their childhood hero had turned against Hulk Hogan. The build-up included Andre physically attacking Hogan on television in ways that seemed genuinely violent. He ripped Hogan's shirt and cross necklace off during a confrontation on Piper's Pit. The attack looked brutal and personal rather than the usual wrestling theatrics. Andre's massive hands grabbing Hogan's throat created an image that wrestling fans had never seen before. The visual of Andre towering over a helpless Hogan made fans question whether their hero could actually win. Many fans genuinely believed Hogan might lose his championship at WrestleMania III. Andre's size advantage was so obvious that even Hogan's most devoted supporters had doubts. Wrestling magazines speculated about whether Hogan could actually lift Andre for his finishing move. The uncertainty created genuine suspense that wrestling events rarely achieved. Fans bought tickets not knowing what would happen, which was unusual for wrestling where outcomes often seemed predictable. The massive crowd created an atmosphere that wrestling had never experienced before. The crowd noise was deafening throughout the entire event. Camera shots showing the massive audience made wrestling look like a major sporting event rather than just entertainment. The size of the crowd legitimized wrestling in ways that smaller venues never could. The match itself was built around one moment that everyone was waiting for. Could Hulk Hogan actually body slam Andre the Giant? The crowd erupted when Hogan lifted Andre off his feet and slammed him to the mat. Gorilla Monsoon's call of the body slam heard round the world became a rallying point for wrestling spectacle. That single move became wrestling's most iconic moment and has been replayed countless times since 1987. The body slam proved that Hogan could overcome any challenge and reinforced his status as wrestling's ultimate hero. Television audiences watched in record numbers as the event was broadcast live. The pay-per-view numbers were massive for wrestling at that time. Millions of people who rarely watched wrestling tuned in specifically for the Hogan vs. Andre match. The television ratings proved that wrestling could attract mainstream audiences when the stakes felt real, and the storytelling was compelling. The actual wrestling in the match was secondary to the spectacle and drama. Neither Hogan nor Andre was known for technical wrestling ability. The match was slow and methodical, focusing on dramatic moments rather than athletic competition. This approach established the entertainment-first philosophy that modern wrestling still follows today. The crowd cared more about the story than the actual wrestling moves being performed. Other wrestling promotions immediately started copying the WrestleMania formula after seeing its success. They tried to create their own supercards with celebrity involvement and elaborate storylines. Regional promotions invested in better production values and larger venues to compete with what the WWF had accomplished. The WrestleMania template became the standard for how major wrestling events should be presented. WrestleMania III proved that wrestling could compete with any form of entertainment when presented properly. The event felt as important as the Super Bowl or World Series to wrestling fans. The production values matched what audiences expected from major television specials. Wrestling had transformed from a niche attraction into legitimate mainstream entertainment. The template for wrestling spectacle was established that night in the Silverdome. Every major wrestling event since 1987 has followed the same basic formula of elaborate storylines, celebrity involvement, and entertainment-focused presentation. Hulk Hogan had reached the absolute peak of his heroic character, but even the biggest stars eventually face decisions that test everything they've built. In early 1994, Hulk Hogan made a decision that shocked the wrestling world and changed his career forever. After spending over a decade as the WWF's biggest star and most recognizable face, Hogan announced he was leaving the company that made him famous. WCW's Eric Bischoff had made overtures during meetings in New York and Florida before Hogan officially signed in May 1994. The news hit wrestling fans like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just any wrestler changing companies. This was the man who had carried the WWF through its national expansion and made wrestling mainstream entertainment. Wrestling fans felt genuinely betrayed by their childhood hero's decision to jump ship. Hogan had been the face of the WWF since the early 1980s. He represented everything good about wrestling to millions of fans who had grown up watching him preach about training, prayers, and vitamins. His departure felt personal to fans who had invested emotionally in his character for over 10 years. Many couldn't understand how he could abandon the company and the fans who had supported him through his entire rise to stardom. WCW made Hogan an offer that the WWF wasn't willing to match. The contract was reportedly worth millions of dollars, but the money wasn't the only factor. WCW promised him something even more valuable than cash. They gave him creative control over his character and storylines. This meant Hogan could influence how he was presented on television and have input into the direction of his wrestling career. The WWF had never been willing to give any wrestler that level of control over their own character. The creative control was a game-changer for Hogan. He had spent years following scripts and storylines that other people wrote for him. Now he could shape his own destiny in professional wrestling. He could decide who he wrestled against and how his character would develop. This kind of autonomy was unprecedented for a wrestler at that time. Most wrestlers had to accept whatever roles the promoters gave them without any input into their own presentation. But the move to WCW initially seemed like a huge mistake. Hogan struggled to recapture the magic that had made him so successful in the WWF. By the mid-1990s, fans were growing tired of the same heroic character they had cheered for over a decade. The training, prayers, and vitamins routine felt stale after so many years. Wrestling audiences wanted something fresh and exciting. Hogan's all-American hero persona wasn't generating the same enthusiasm it had during the 1980s. Younger fans who hadn't grown up during Hulkamania weren't as invested in his character. The wrestling business was changing, and Hogan seemed stuck in the past. The WCW environment was different from what he was used to. The production values weren't as high. The storylines weren't as compelling. The crowds didn't react to him the same way WWF audiences had. Something was missing from his performances that fans noticed immediately. Critics questioned whether Hogan's best days were behind him. Wrestling journalists wrote articles suggesting that Hogan was past his prime and couldn't carry a wrestling promotion anymore. Backstage at WCW, tensions were building around Hogan's performance and the company's investment in him. Other wrestlers resented the special treatment he received and the creative control he had been given. Some felt that Hogan was holding back younger talent who deserved opportunities to become main event stars. The locker room atmosphere became strained as wrestlers questioned whether Hogan still deserved his position at the top of the card. Wrestling fans started losing interest in Hogan's matches and storylines. His feuds with other WCW wrestlers felt forced and unnatural. The chemistry he had developed with WWF opponents over many years wasn't there with his new rivals. Match quality declined as Hogan seemed to be going through the motions rather than putting in the effort that had made him famous. Behind the scenes, plans were developing for the most shocking character transformation in wrestling history. WCW executives and creative team members were discussing radical changes to Hogan's character. They realized that the current approach wasn't working and that drastic action was needed. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had appeared on WCW Monday Nitro on May 27, 1996, causing chaos as outsiders claiming to represent another wrestling organization. The storyline built toward a six-man tag team match at Bash at the Beach on July 7, 1996, where Hall and Nash would reveal their mystery partner. Wrestling fans expected someone from outside WCW, maybe a surprise return or debut. Nobody expected what actually happened that night. When Hulk Hogan walked down the ramp and leg-dropped Randy Savage, the wrestling world exploded. This wasn't just any heel turn. This was the man who had told children to say their prayers and eat their vitamins for over a decade. Fans had invested their entire childhood in believing Hogan represented everything good about wrestling. His betrayal felt personal and real in ways that scripted wrestling rarely achieved. Hogan himself was concerned about alienating longtime Hulkamaniacs who had supported him since the early 1980s, making his decision even more dramatic. The crowd reaction was unlike anything wrestling had ever seen before. Fans threw garbage into the ring with genuine anger and hatred. Beer cups, popcorn containers, and programs rained down from every section of the arena. The booing was so loud that wrestlers couldn't hear each other speak in the ring. This wasn't the usual wrestling crowd playing along with a storyline. These fans were genuinely furious at what they had just witnessed. Hogan's transformation into Hollywood. Hogan represented everything wrong with celebrity culture during the 1990s. He grew out his beard and dyed it black. The familiar red and yellow attire was replaced with black and white NWO colors. His entire personality changed from the humble hero to an arrogant superstar who thought he was bigger than wrestling itself. He talked about his Hollywood connections and acted like wrestling fans were beneath him. The character worked because it reflected real frustrations that fans had with celebrities who forgot where they came from. Hollywood Hogan represented every actor or musician who became successful and then looked down on their original fan base. Wrestling fans could relate to feeling abandoned by someone they had supported during their rise to fame. The storyline tapped into genuine emotions about loyalty and betrayal. WCW had taken an enormous risk by turning their biggest star into a villain. Hogan was still their most recognizable performer and main draw for casual fans. Turning him heel could have backfired completely and cost them their most valuable asset. But the creative team understood that Hogan's character had become stagnant and needed something dramatic to revitalize his career. The NWO storyline created must-see television that wrestling fans couldn't ignore. Every Monday night on WCW Monday Nitro, viewers watched to see what the New World Order would do next. The group positioned themselves as invaders trying to take over WCW from within. They spray-painted the WCW World Heavyweight Championship belt black and white, turning wrestling's most prestigious prize into their personal statement. WCW's ratings skyrocketed as fans tuned in to see the NWO storyline develop. The Monday Night Wars began in earnest as WCW used Hogan's reinvention to compete directly with the WWF. For the first time since the national expansion of the 1980s, the WWF faced serious competition from another wrestling promotion. The NWO gave WCW something unique that wrestling fans couldn't see anywhere else. Hollywood Hogan's heel work was some of the best of his career. He cut promos that made fans genuinely hate him while showcasing personality traits that had been hidden during his heroic run. Hogan's return to WWE in February 2002 was different from anything wrestling fans had seen before. This wasn't the same wrestler who had dominated the 1980s or shocked the world with his NWO heel turn. This was a 49-year-old man with decades of wear and tear on his body, trying to recapture magic from 20 years earlier. He briefly reunited with the NWO before headlining WrestleMania X solo against The Rock. His back problems were obvious to anyone watching. His movements were slower and more careful than they had been during his prime years. But something unexpected happened when he stepped back into a WWE ring. The crowd reactions were louder than anyone anticipated. Fans who had grown up during Hulkamania brought their own children to see their childhood hero perform one more time. The red and yellow colors returned, along with the familiar entrance music that had defined an entire generation's wrestling memories. Hogan's charisma hadn't diminished even though his athletic ability clearly had. He could still work a crowd better than wrestlers half his age. His 2002 championship run proved he could still draw money and television ratings. Winning the undisputed championship at Backlash on April 21st marked his 6th WWE championship and demonstrated his continued drawing power. The title reign lasted less than a month before he lost to The Undertaker at Judgment Day. But the fan response showed that Hulkamania still had commercial value. WWE used his nostalgia appeal to boost pay-per-view buy rates and television viewership during a period when the company needed established stars. But everyone involved knew this wrestling comeback had an expiration date. Hogan's body couldn't handle the physical demands of full-time wrestling anymore. His surgeries and injuries from decades of performing had taken their toll. He needed to find new ways to stay relevant and maintain his celebrity status without depending on active wrestling performances. Reality television offered Hogan a way to remain in the public eye without the physical demands of wrestling. Hogan Knows Best premiered in 2005 on VH1 and became an immediate hit. But reality television was a double-edged sword that would soon cut both ways. The cameras that made him famous as a family man would also document the personal problems that threatened to destroy his reputation. In July 2015, leaked audio recordings destroyed Hogan's reputation overnight. Fans who had idolized the All-American hero for 30 years felt betrayed. WWE responded by removing him from their Hall of Fame and scrubbing his history from programming entirely. The Gawker lawsuit added complexity to his troubles. The media company published adult tape excerpts without permission, leading to a $140 million verdict in 2016. His messy divorce from Linda became a public spectacle covered by entertainment media, further damaging his role model image. Wrestling fans debated whether Hogan's contributions could be separated from his personal failings. Some argued his impact was too important to ignore. Others believed his comments disqualified him from celebration. The wrestling community was divided. WWE eventually reconciled with Hogan, reinstating him to the Hall of Fame in 2018. His return was carefully managed with limited appearances. The rehabilitation wasn't universally accepted. Some fans welcomed him back while others remained angry. But at the end of the day, I think he's still just a human. He got more hate than any man deserves. Humans make mistakes. People who had never met him felt entitled to destroy his legacy completely. We demand perfection from our heroes, but perfection doesn't exist. Everyone has said things they regret. Everyone has moments they wish they could take back. The difference is, most of us don't have those moments recorded and broadcast to the world. Despite the controversies that marked his later years, Hogan's contributions to wrestling and popular culture remained undeniable. On July 25, 2025, the wrestling world lost its most transformative figure when Terry Bollea passed away at age 71 at his Clearwater Beach home. In death, Hogan's monumental impact becomes even clearer. He didn't just make wrestling mainstream, he created the blueprint for modern celebrity culture itself. 4 decades later, every crossover star, every viral moment, every entertainment spectacle still follows the path that Hulk Hogan carved through the American consciousness forever. Rest in peace, Hulkster. Thank you for the memories and for showing kids they could be heroes too. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.